In between switching our committees out, at 5 o'clock there will be an environmental quality subcommittee meeting here. So we have this for an hour, and I'll go ahead and let Representative Hardin open us with a prayer.
Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we join our hearts together here in prayer to praise your holy name, Father, to thank you for your goodness toward us and for all the natural resources you have given us to enjoy. Father, we just pray that we will be right in our stewardship of those resources and look for you and your holy will in all that we do. These things we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So this afternoon we are so very lucky to have two wonderful presentations. This committee delves into very hard, difficult issues, and every now and then it's nice to pause and see where innovation and the good old commitment to doing good stewardship actually is taking place almost on its own will of the community or the people involved. So Randy Nix, where's Randy? Right here. I'll let you go ahead and introduce our first presenters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A little bit of background. Last year I carried a piece of legislation to name the section of I-85 from exit 18 to exit 2 in the name of Ray C. Anderson, the Ray C. Anderson Memorial Highway. And little did I know at that time that it was going to become a major project, not only for West Georgia, but for all of Georgia and possibly for the entire world. Since that time, the Ray Anderson Foundation has partnered with a number of groups, and their goal is to make that the most sustainable segment of roadway in the world. Through a number of different innovative environmental processes. The thing about Ray Anderson that I would mention to you, Ray was an industrialist, but he was also an environmentalist. And Ray was willing to put his entire company on the line, Interface Flooring, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. They pioneered and just did a tremendous job with the carpet squares. But Ray was willing to put that entire company on the line to prove that it could be an environmentally friendly operation. And his goal was, by the year 2020, that nothing from their company would go into a landfill. And now when you're manufacturing carpet, that's a pretty big goal. But they're getting very, very close to being there. The presentation today is going to tell you about some of the things that they have already begun to do, and a lot of the things that I'm looking forward to see happening in the future. Harriet Langford is with us today. Harriet is Ray's daughter, and Allison Kelly with the Georgia Conservancy is here, and I think they're going to jointly present this to you. So I think you'll find this very interesting, and I am very happy to be able to introduce them today to make this presentation for the Mission Zero Corridor.
Thank you. If y'all will come up to, you want to present from there, that's fine, or you can sit at the table. Oh, you've got your setup there. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing us to be here, and the committee members. We appreciate your time. As Randy said, I'm Harriet Langford, and I'm Ray Anderson's daughter, and we want to share with you this exciting project that's going to be taking place in West Georgia, Interstate 85, from exit 18 to 2. As Randy said, Ray was the founder and the CEO of Interface, and this is the world's largest manufacturer of modular carpet tiles. And in 1994, he went to the West Coast to talk to an architecture firm about his carpet, and he was thrown a prodigious question while he was talking, so what are you doing for the environment? And Ray's comment was, well, I comply by all the laws and rules and regulations. After that speech, someone walked up to him and handed him a book called The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken. And he read every word in that book, and he said it felt like a spear went into his chest. He felt very convicted as an industrial plunderer, and he really set out to change the way he made carpet, using the closed loop system, reclaim that carpet and reuse it again. He really knew this was a very dirty business, 80% petroleum product. So it was very heavily laden with that. And so when he went to change the way this carpet was done, he actually reused the backing, which saved over $500 million just by reclaiming his product, shaving the top, and doing the new fibers on top. He moved quickly up in the industrial world to be known as the greenest industrialist of the century. And upon his passing, he established the Ray C. Anderson Foundation that would perpetuate his shared values and continue his legacy. And the family wanted to honor Ray, and Randy had mentioned this, that naming him for this highway, Ray C. Anderson Memorial Highway, was really just the beginning. And I didn't feel like that was very good. I thought I could do better. I think he would have been upset to think he was named for a dirty highway. So we saw a vision that would encompass his values and something he would be proud of, and that was to create the most sustainable and restorative highway on this 16-mile stretch right at West Georgia. Both of his carpet manufacturing facilities fell in between exit 18 and 2, which is LaGrange and West Point, and that he was born in West Point and established his first business in LaGrange. So this was a very special area for him. And if you will, just imagine with me for a moment and think of our highways not just as a means of transportation, but as a way to showcase cutting-edge technologies and innovations in sustainability. It's imagining how we can better educate the 11.7 million travelers that come through this corridor each year and become a model for the world. So the Ray C. Anderson Foundation partnered with Georgia Conservancy, Interface, and the Georgia Tech College of Architecture to do a study that gave us a model for this highway to be a carbon-neutral highway and a smart highway. Nowhere's this been done, maybe bits and pieces around the world, but nowhere has this been concentrated in one particular area. And this blueprint that Georgia Tech gave us really is the model for the highway of the future. And just as Ray and Interface have set the model for industry to begin a path of positive impact on the environment, we intend to be a game changer in transportation ecology and set the framework that will change our highways forever. I'll turn it over to Allie Kelly, Senior Director of Special Projects for Georgia Conservancy, and she'll share with you a presentation for our video.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about our 16-mile stretch of Interstate 85 in West Georgia. My name is Allie Kelly, and I represent the Georgia Conservancy, and it has been my honor and pleasure to work on this project for the last 9 months with the Ray C. Anderson Foundation and with our other partners. Our partners include Kia, which is located at Exit 6. We're also partnered with Liberty Tire Recycling, with Hannah Solar, with the Georgia Tech Schools of Architecture, Engineering, and the School of Business, as well as an architecture firm called Perkins & Will, and of course the Georgia Conservancy, which I represent, and Interface Ray's Carpet Company. When we first started thinking about this project 9 months ago, Harriet and I were talking about wildflowers. Really. We were trying to figure out how to help the monarchs by planting milkweed, and we were saying, well, maybe we can construct some solar on this highway, and it won't just be for transportation. Maybe we can generate a little bit of energy on the highway as well. What we didn't realize is that there are people all over the globe who are working to solve some of the challenges that our transportation system poses for our communities and for the environment. And what we are tapping into is work that has been going on for decades, that has evolved far beyond anything that Harriet and I could have imagined when we were thinking about wildflowers. And it's actually really cool. I think it's an opportunity for Georgia, and in particular West Georgia, to tap into some innovation and cutting-edge technology that I really think can attract some economic development to the area. I think it'll give another tool in the tool chest for our governor and for you as state leaders to talk about when you go to other parts of the country and other parts of the world, to talk about the ways in which Georgia is leading. I think this project could become another tool in your tool chest in talking about the ways that Georgia really is getting ahead of the curve in solving not just our local challenges, but coming up with solutions for global challenges. So basically what we've done so far is we've gone to Georgia Tech and we've commissioned a study. This is a very basic blueprint study. It looks at major areas that you would assume would be areas of concern with highways, right? So environmental degradation, resources that we are squandering, habitat degradation, issues for communities, and then also life safety. The great thing that Georgia Tech did with this study is they provided a solutions framework that can be used anywhere in the world while we are working in West Georgia. So I want to commend Georgia Tech for going above and beyond what we asked them to do. Someone in China or someone in Brazil can be working on the same project that we are in their own neighborhood, and we can be learning from each other. And I think that's a really smart way to approach this project, because everyone in the world is dealing with these issues when it comes to transportation, so we should be learning from each other. So the next slide describes some of the challenges in some major areas under the heading of environmental degradation, including water, air, noise pollution. I really just want to focus in on two of these things because I'm trying to respect the time constraints that this committee has. So I want us to think about CO2, and I want us to think about water pollution. First of all, this stretch of I-85 is interwoven with a watershed. Long Cane Creek and two of its tributaries are actually winding in and out of Interstate 85 as you are traveling south approaching the Georgia-Alabama line. And that watershed is near failing. So EPA has graded the water quality in Long Cane Creek and its tributaries as 60 out of 100. And we know that the interstate is contributing somewhat to that water quality issue. Also, in terms of CO2, which is an issue that we know we're, as a state, looking at some coming federal regulations on CO2 emissions from power plants, and we know that there's some type of reckoning that we're going to have to deal with involving CO2 in the future. So trying to look at whether or not we can make a highway carbon neutral. On our highway, every day, 318 tons of carbon is emitted, and annually that's 116,000 tons of carbon on our stretch of highway. We're looking at an issue that the world is looking at, but on our 16 miles, it's a lot easier to think in terms of 318 tons a day of carbon instead of what our country is dealing with, which is 5.4 million tons of carbon every year on our interstates and our highways. So the next slide that you'll see just sort of breaks down where the carbon's coming from. And I do want to touch a little bit on forest-based carbon sequestration, because I know that that's an issue that this state legislature has already addressed for Georgia in passing some legislation that allows for forest-based carbon sequestration programs. Just for our 16 miles, it would take 201 square miles, or roughly half the area of Atlanta, to sequester all the carbon that's emitted on our highway. So that's clearly not the only method that we could use to approach this problem. What Georgia Tech is telling us is going to be central or key to addressing both the carbon issue and the water issue, and you probably want to hold on to your seats for this one. They're telling us it's algae. So right now, algae is being used in two ways. It's being grown in shipping containers, which cost about $10,000 or $15,000 a piece. And they are connecting these well, first of all, they're stacking the shipping containers and they're connecting them to smokestacks. And the algae absorbs the CO2. It actually grows better from the CO2. So the CO2 from the smokestack of an industry feeds into the shipping containers, and the algae grows in the shipping containers. And these companies growing the algae, one of which is located in Cumming, Georgia, so these are Georgia-based companies. They use that algae for nutritional supplements that you might buy at GNC. They also use them for farm feed, and they're also experimenting with turning algae into biofuels. Specifically, Boeing is looking at algae as jet fuel. So we know that algae can be utilized on the highway to deal with our carbon issue. We've had a lot of conversations with Georgia DOT about this. So GDOT has passed a unanimous resolution in support of our project. We do have GDOT staffers who we work with on a regular basis, and what we're talking about with GDOT, first of all, is to establish algae ponds down the center median of our stretch of I-85, which GDOT is already utilizing ponds and medians to handle stormwater issues in the metro Atlanta area. So a shallow pond growing algae on our 16-mile corridor is actually not a big deal to GDOT. You can also grow algae in transparent tubes and mount them to bridges, and the air that flows against the bridge will feed into the algae tube, and the algae absorbs the CO2 that way. And also you can grow algae on terraces coming down from bridges, and the algae interacts with the atmosphere and absorbs the carbon that way. So these are all technologies that are here right now. I see a lot of quizzical looks, which is great, because maybe this is something that the committee will want to continue learning about. We met with some folks from Georgia Tech's Research Institute yesterday, GTRI. They get about $300 million every year from the Department of Defense to work on technologies like this, and they are working on an algae technology at GTRI specifically to deal with carbon sequestration. So what we want to do is to demonstrate on an actual highway with Georgia Tech to demonstrate how this can be done. And we hope to have demonstration sites of these technologies on our highway constructed in the next our goal is to deal with our carbon issue in 5 years, so to be carbon neutral on our highway by 2020. Also, I'll just tell you a little bit about how algae helps to deal with water pollution. Interface actually developed a carpet substrate that algae grows on top of, and you can mount the carpet substrate on a 60-foot area of, it could be on an incline or on a decline, so it could even be a piece of farm equipment that you attach it to. And what they've tested, this technology, is at combined animal feeding operations, so pig farms and chicken farms. And at the top of the incline, they have separated out the solids from the farming water pollution, and they have let the water run over the carpet substrate that is growing the algae. And after 60 feet of running over the algae with no energy expenditure at all, you're just utilizing gravity, by the time it gets to the end of the 60-foot decline, the water is purified and ready to return to a creek or a river or a watershed. So this is being looked at as a way of dealing with point source pollution at agricultural locations like pig farms and chicken farms as a low-cost way to help purify wastewater without having to utilize a lot of electricity in the process. So I'll quickly work through the rest of this information. You know, basically the technology is being developed all around the world, including it's being developed here in Georgia. Interface has developed this algae technology for improving water quality. And if you'll move forward a couple of slides, this is a preview of what the Georgia Tech study is going to look like. Again, it is going to deal with how to be more efficient with our resources, how to remediate some of our pollution, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, or otherwise. Also making our roads safer and helping our highways, helping our communities to reconnect through our highways instead of some of our communities are actually disconnected by our highways. So I'll talk a little bit quickly about beautification. We have commissioned a master plan to beautify all 5 interchanges on our 16 miles of I-85, and we've also incorporated some solar planning in that master plan. So we'll be, in the short term, working to beautify the 16-mile stretch of highway with some natural and native plants that will require less maintenance, that will require less fertilizers, less pesticides, less mowing, and then also trying to get some solar located at our interchanges so that we can offset the energy demands of the signaling and the lighting at those interchanges. That's something that we're going to accomplish at least 2 of our 5 exits this year. Also, looking at ways that we could be generating electricity or energy on our highway. I've already talked a little bit about highway solar. I want to raise your awareness of a kind of energy technology. It's called piezoelectric technology. So every time that a car or a truck rolls over the surface of the street or the highway, there's electricity, there's energy that's being generated as any tire rolls over. We're not currently capturing any of that energy production. So Georgia Tech has innovated a material that can go into the asphalt and can capture the energy that is created when a tire rolls over the interstate surface. And that energy, once captured in the pavement, can be stored in a battery. It can be used to power the lighting along the side of the highway. And we're actually working with tech to try to come up with, instead of a charging station for an electric vehicle where you have to stop and plug your car in, we're actually trying to come up with a dedicated lane where you keep moving. You just pull your car into the dedicated lane, and the energy that your car is creating as it drives over the surface of the road is recycled back into your car's battery. And you're actually charging while you're driving. So this is possible. We already have the material that captures the energy, and we just have to figure out the mechanism for feeding it back into the battery. And this is something that we're working on getting on our highway. I'm going to be really specific. The West Point Welcome Center at the state line is going through a renovation project funded by GDOT, and Liberty Tire Recycling is already donating the asphalt material, which is made from recycled tires. And we have an opportunity, since it's already going to be repaved, to incorporate this piezoelectric material into the ground to test it and demonstrate it at the Welcome Center. And this is possible in the next 18 months. As far as solar goes, the state of Oregon has already written the handbook with Federal Highway Administration on how to incorporate solar, utilizing a financial partnership with a large utility in the state. So we're talking with Georgia Power and others, as well as with GDOT, about the feasibility of getting solar installations along the highway and trying to work through the details of what you do with the energy that's generated, because on our highway, there's not a lot of, in most parts of the 16 miles, there's not a lot of highway lighting or signaling that could immediately utilize the energy, so we've got to figure out storage issues. Just quickly, we do have hundreds of acres of conservation lands that are bisected by our highway. So one thing that we want to do is incorporate wildlife bridges like this one shown out in Montana to help reduce the number of animal strikes that cause car damage, that cause insurance premiums on vehicles to be higher than they should be, and that also cause human fatalities. GDOT is actually building a migration bridge in Georgia right now. I don't know how many of y'all know that, but they're building one of these in central Georgia for the black bear population. So this is happening already, and we'd like to have one of them on our highway as well to show people in another part of the state what is possible. Last but not least is I want to give you all a little bit of information about the smart highway concept. This is something that is being developed, but we don't see a lot of it being developed here in the United States, so this really would be an opportunity for Georgia to shine nationally. So when you change a light bulb over to LED, you are achieving a new capability with that LED light that you don't have with a traditional light. So when you change it to LED, LED lights actually talk to each other, and they can talk to the cloud. So by changing the lighting on our highway to LED, the lighting can talk to each other about what's going on the highway. And you establish something that they in Silicon Valley call a mesh network. And the mesh network can tell your car what is happening ahead of you on the highway. So if there is an animal carcass, if there's congestion, if there's been an accident, or even if there's an helpful FYI, like there's a motorcycle 2 cars ahead of you that you can't see, but you should be aware that the motorcycle's there and increase the distance that you have between you and the car in front of you. The road can actually talk to your car and help improve safety and save lives on our highways. So that's something that we're looking at for 2015 for our highway, is to change over the lighting to LED, establish a mesh network, and start to incorporate sensors on our highways that will begin to give us this kind of information that we can then share with drivers and hopefully make this 16-mile stretch of Interstate 85 the safest in the state. And then these are just a couple of examples of what is happening in other parts of the world that we would like to attract to Georgia. Coca-Cola is a corporation that is on our highway. They have a major distribution center at Exit 2 West Point. They actually have a billboard in the Philippines. It's alive. It's made of plants. It absorbs 50,000 pounds of carbon every year. A university in Peru has developed 2 billboards. One absorbs water from humid atmospheres and filters it within the billboard, and the community in Lima that does not have access to water lines up every morning and gets water from the billboard. We have a humid atmosphere here too, so we'd like to see if that would work here. They've also developed this billboard that absorbs over 99% of airborne bacteria. It works for a 5-block radius, and this would be even more applicable for Metro Atlanta, but we'd like to see one of these on our highway as well. They have solar panels in the road now, and these have been developed in Idaho. They've been deployed in Europe, and they're very expensive, but we'd like to see these incorporated on some of the bridges on our highway. The safety benefit of these solar panels in the roadway is that ice and snow does not gather on them during the winter time. They're too warm. So this would prevent our bridges from icing. And last but not least, this is just a depiction of how we could incorporate some of the technology that Georgia Tech is working on right now to address the carbon issue on our 16 miles in 5 years. So you'll see some of the elements that I've talked about, the carbon tubes on the bridges, the algae tubes on the bridges, the algae running down the center median, the utilization of native plants that are unmowed for bioswales to help clear the water, and then also carbon scrubbers, which is an engineered solution that Georgia Tech is working on. So again, I just wanted to recognize our partners. Kia has done a lot of work with us, as well as Toto Toilets and Interface and Liberty Tire Recycling at our West Point Welcome Center. The West Point Welcome Center renovation will be complete in about 18 months, so we'll have a ribbon cutting on the new water-efficient toilets and water fixtures, the new carpet, the new asphalt, hopefully incorporating our piezoelectric material, and then we also think that we're going to be the state's first solar array that powers an electric vehicle charging station. They call it PV to EV, photovoltaic to electric vehicle. We believe that we'll have one of those at the West Point Welcome Center, and it will be the first Welcome Center or Visitor Center in the entire Southeast to have this kind of infrastructure. And with that, I just want to say thank you again for your patience as I work through a fairly rich discussion topic in 15 minutes. And just want to say thank you for the time and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes here for questions because we're going to be doing 2 presentations. But will y'all be available after the 5 o'clock time? We have a subcommittee meeting, but I think our committee members might want to ask you some questions. And I know we will also need contact information. Do we contact you? Do we contact Harriet? Or how do y'all want that to work? But
Yes, ma'am.
I was trying to decide, how do you train the bears to go over the bridges? And then the second thing, I was trying to figure out, does anger generate more energy? Because we have some of that around the Capitol at times. So, and if we stay calm, is it any good for anybody? So, you know.
I'll tell you one thing that Georgia Tech's Research Institute, GTRI, has told us is that this piezoelectric mesh material, it's a fabric material. So the energy that we create when we move our arms and our legs, we can be wearing suits in the near future that have this material in them, and you can actually charge your iPhone or your device with the movement that your body makes, which the material in your clothing is capturing. And that's just one application. I mean, you could go on and on with the ways that this material can be incorporated into our everyday life. Interface, think about interface carpet squares incorporating piezoelectric mesh, and then every time someone walks on a particular carpet tile, that energy is captured.
So that's good food for thought and scary food for thought. So we have a question from number 21. If you'll introduce yourself, then ask your question.
I'm Buddy Harden. I just had I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, this is going to save so much of the atmosphere, the environment, but what is the cost factor involved? How does that play out against what we will save by creating the energy with these materials?
Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. So some of the cost issues are just going to have to be resolved over time, like we've seen with solar panels. Some of this technology actually isn't very expensive in and of itself, the material. So the piezoelectric material is actually not an expensive material. It's made with common materials. But what we hope to achieve in the near term on our highway is an area for just proving technologies. So people anywhere, people in Europe, people in China can come here to Georgia and see these things deployed in one place. And you can sort of figure out what you can afford, what might work in your area. And if we take the first step of demonstrating, testing, and proving, then we figure out what the cost-benefit analysis is of the stuff that works. And if it works well enough, and if it happens to be made from reasonably priced materials like piezoelectric, then that will probably go to market first.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And so in the future, if our committee wishes to go and see this, will there be a demonstration area that they can go to with interactive learning or that type of an educational component instead of just using it and driving? So hold on just a second. Our photographers here just take pictures of our presenters and the committee so that they can use that for themselves. Shoot away, so y'all smile. Will there be information for us as individuals or as a committee to see if there's a process that we can eventually go see?
Yes, ma'am. So we're trying to establish the West Point Welcome Center as the ground zero for Mission Zero. So that is where a lot of the technology that you can actually go up and see instead of just being on the highway when you're traveling 70 miles per hour, but actually interact with will be at the West Point Welcome Center. We're also going to get touch screens that are keeping the metrics on what's being accomplished through the technology. So if it's carbon that's being absorbed or if it's water that's being cleaned or energy that's being captured, All of that data would be available for people to see real time on a touch screen, which they're incorporating a lot of that already at the LEED Platinum buildings at Georgia Tech. I probably should have led with this so you understand where the project has been in terms of welcoming and making room for government officials to participate. So we have, as I mentioned, received a resolution of support from GDOT, and we're working with the Deputy Commissioner and the Chief Engineer. We've also received a letter of support from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. The City of West Point and the City of LaGrange have both passed resolutions of unanimous support, as has Troup County. And we've also met with the PSC as well as EPA Region 4. So we are trying to create a very broad umbrella of opportunity for everyone to learn and participate in this is the only place in the nation that we know of this question being asked. Can a highway be sustainable? Can we clean up the carbon on a highway? I don't know of it anywhere in the world. I think maybe it's not the first in the world, but maybe it's globally significant. And I think that West Georgia has a lot to be proud of, and the state of Georgia has a lot to be proud of.
Thank you. And as we do the movement to the second presentation, Harriet, do you mind standing up at the podium so that we can get a photograph of that and the committee? And this is for y'all to use as well for your presentation, and we certainly appreciate it. Thank you. And Harriet and Allie, wow, thank you. So really appreciate it. So for our next program, we have Jonathan Parker, who's a forest engineer and a Georgia and Alabama registered forester. He's the president of the Good 40 Incorporated, and then with him also is the landowner. And if y'all will come up here and stand, she can get a couple of pictures. Just kind of move this way while our real important engineer here is changing over to what we need. But this is Ann Beagle, and Ann is really involved in Coweta County and its community with lots of good causes. But I don't know if you stumbled on this technology to use it to run your car to get some extra electricity. But this is, I asked him to come and talk to us about how to improve long-term timber quality, productivity while protecting and enhancing wildlife, recreation, real estate, water quality, and getting electricity for your car. So they are able to use really the woody biomass process. It's in Barnesville, Georgia. We've talked about this on and off as a committee, and so I never knew that it got to that final stage of being able to be used by individuals for electricity. So I think this might be a good presentation for our committee as well. And so y'all use the wrong kind of electricity. So do you want to, we can go ahead and introduce Ann, and then just you can come sit at the tables up here, and when the presentation is ready, we'll just go to that. So.
Okay. Well, this is great because this is exciting. It's my first PowerPoint, so when I went through school, they had Fortran cards and all that kind of fun stuff. So,
And you can come join, please.
I'm not sure how the microphone and all that works. Is this?
We've got it on.
You can hear me okay?
And the Beagle family are the landowners, and it's Dr. Phil and Ann Beagle. So please, we welcome y'all here today. Just have a seat. Is there a chair there for you?
We can
Okay.
pull another one.
All right. Sorry. And y'all can go ahead and start talking, and then they'll.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Ann and I decided that I'll get to talk first. So to kind of lay the foundation, and we have some slides, and we're getting those turned on. But this is exciting for the state of Georgia, and here's why: is we're making electricity, renewable electricity. We talked about carbon and sustainability in West Point. Well, this is a big part of that. In Georgia, we don't make much of our own electricity from fuels we provide. Most of it's imported from out of state. In the governor's strategic energy plan that was done in 2006, I don't know if y'all remember, but we were worried about getting gasoline to go to the Georgia game, okay? And I don't know if you also remember, but the prices of fuels shot up dramatically. And what happened is a plant that was built in Barnesville, Georgia, that runs on renewable resources, did it not because Georgia reached out his arms and said, we want renewable energy. It did it because the price of energy had gotten so high, the avoided cost, that suddenly it was feasible. So this was done without the renewable aspect coming into play. This was done because they're required, the Public Service Commission requires Georgia Power to ask for any renewables that want to produce the electricity when they're asking for more capacity for the same avoided cost, that they give them the opportunity if they can do it with 75% renewables. This was one point in history where it happened. And so that gave us an avenue to try some things from the forester's perspective that we've long wanted to do. For years, we've been trying to figure out, you just let me know when it, okay, you take your time. We're doing good over here. And, but for the first time, foresters could start to look at private non-industrial landowners' properties and say, all right, we need a tool to get the bad trees out so the good trees can grow. And what you'll find is 57% of the commercial timberland in Georgia is owned by people just like Miss Ann. The private individuals, they have no interest in a sawmill or paper mill, and all they want to do is enjoy their property. In recreation, wildlife, water quality, protect the real estate, all of those are very important issues for her and her family. And that legacy and that stewardship they want to pass down to their family. But how do you take a natural, not a clear-cut, sprayed, replanted forest that more of the industrial landowners use? How do you manage a natural, diverse forest in a sustainable fashion and improve the long-term quality and productivity of that property so it contributes from a host of reasons? Well, the name of my company is The Good 40, and we got that name from an idea that was started in the 1930s with the Forest Service. They recognized that industry did a good job of hiring foresters and practicing forestry for timber production. And they probably, you know, did a lot of management of the natural resources of water quality and things like that, but it was timber productivity. But they noticed that the private landowners, the non-industrial landowners, did not understand or could not invest in or financially didn't have the capability to do the industrial type management. They may not have wanted to. They may have enjoyed the woods, the nature, and that type of thing. But what would happen over time is when they did decide to cut timber, the people that came in and the equipment they had at the time, they would cut the biggest and the best and leave what was left. And unfortunately, that's caused a long-term degradation in the quality of the timber. Now, they tried to, and they called it the Good 40 study, okay? They took a bad 40 that had been logged over and had all kinds of quality issues, and they said, all right, can we just start to thin the worst timber out of here, the worst anything out, and improve the long-term quality of this property and turn it into a highly productive, well-managed, high-quality forest? And that was the whole idea behind the Good 40, is they took a bad 40 and made it good. Well, fast forward now. Now we've got the opportunity to go into an unmanaged forest that's pretty, aesthetic, recreation's part of it. It might be embedded in with a pasture, farmland, and that type of thing. How do you go in there and get out the bad stuff so that the invasive species, the crooked, diseased, forked, we have some slides of, well, we have some slides on Miss Ann's property where we're in a hardwood bottom, and what happened 30 or 40 years ago is a big tree died, and when it died, the crooked trees underneath of the same species took over, and instead of having a big, pretty tall tree that's 80 years old, we've got a bunch of 20-year-old trees that are crooked and of the same species. So as a forester, you want to get some of those out, and what that also enables you to do is create a better wildlife environment, because most of the biologists you'll find when they start to look at a stand of timber and the types of trees, they want to get some filtered sunlight into the forest floor, and they want to start control what we call basal area. I don't know if y'all have ever seen a fox squirrel. You know, they're very pretty, right? And they have all kinds of different coloring. You will not find a fox squirrel in the Piedmont of Georgia unless you go in there and thin out the bad trees and get the basal area down to a certain level, and then the sunlight comes in, and then they really move in. It's fascinating to watch. And you know, it's not a species you think about hunting. It's a species you think about looking at and saying, you know, that's really unique and unusual. They don't run off like regular squirrels, but it's an indicator species of something more complex going on and more sophisticated going on, is that you start to get flowering plants in the forest floor that brings in browse and things that birds and non-game birds and other types of animals need to thrive. So you can actually go into a forest that's not had anything done and extract low-quality material, but you got to have a market for that, and that's where the plant in Barnesville comes in. It allows us to chip that up and take it to a mill that actually uses it to make electricity. Now, the neat thing about Miss Ann is on her 70 acres, it looks like a park now. If we had the slide, we would have a but anyway, it looks like a park now. Before, you see a lot of crooked. Now, we also have the original survey of their property when the Indians ceded the land to the United States of America and the state of Georgia. In it, they blazed the property line trees, and they identified the species of the trees. So you can look at that, and then you can look at the species of the trees that are on their property now, and it's the same species. The reason I'm saying that is we're managing a diverse forest that's the same species composition as it was when it was virgin land. And so that's kind of neat. Instead of clear cutting and replanting, we're thinking about how do we keep this sustainable, long term, and that's where the power plant comes in. We take the one load of unneeded biomass chipped up will supply 2 homes for a year of electricity. It'll run her car, which is a Nissan Leaf, for 50,000 miles. Off of her property, we were able to supply 100 homes with renewable energy. Now, what's neat about that is that amount of biomass replaced coal, natural gas, or any other fossil fuel. So if we did not do it, she did not allow us to do what we did, the state of Georgia would have had to import some kind of fossil fuel and generate the equivalent electricity to replace what she was able to contribute through this process. And when you talk about carbon footprint, the way you look at that is you say, all right, you use was unneeded biomass and you create electricity. The trees you leave out there that are now healthier and have a better environment, they're able to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, release oxygen, and you create what's considered more of a carbon neutral event. Now you get into a discussion about, well, what about the diesel used in the machines to extract it? And then the second half of that argument says, well, yeah, but if you left this stuff out here to die and rot, it would still, the cellulose would break down and release the same amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Then you use coal or some other natural gas. Now you have a supersaturated atmosphere of carbon dioxide. So it's a healthier equation for energy production. Now, quickly, the one thing that makes it difficult for the next plant to be built, and they did plan to build a sister plant to this in LaGrange, which would be nice because it would be the footprint where we're talking about sustainability and carbon issues and really improving the long-term quality of timber from aesthetic and recreation and those other issues. Is the way it's set up right now is if you want to build one of these plants, there's not a good way to index the cost. If Georgia Power wanted to build this plant, they would ask for fuel pass-through cost, which means when the fuel goes up, they pass that through to the consumer. When these independent plants want to do it, they try to limit that to 15%. It's not fair, and Georgia Power asked for the same thing when they wanted to take Plant Mitchell and turn it into a biomass plant. They asked for full cost pass-through. We don't have that in that state, and it's not fair. Timber Mart South has an indexing for biomass fuel. That should be part of the equation with the Public Service Commission, with any independent who wants to produce that power, especially renewable power in the state. Now, what got this article started, or that Lynn read and led to us being here, was the fact that I read in the paper, and a Public Service Commission member said that we had gotten renewable wind energy from Oklahoma, and I'm thinking, why in the heck are we here in Georgia with all this biomass? Do you realize the world's largest pellet plant is sitting in Waycross, Georgia, and they're sending 100% of their pellets, renewable fuel, to Europe? 100%. Georgia is the largest single producer of wood pellets in the world, and we're sending all of it overseas. And here we are, and we can't even, take something that benefits private landowners, answers a problem that's existed for private landowners for almost 80 years that we've been doing all kinds of research on. There's all kinds of government funding programs to improve the long-term quality and productivity of private landowners, and we're not taking advantage of the natural resources right here in our state. And that's not good. And if you go back to the governor's strategic energy plan, and you say, what are the elements in that plan that they look to us to implement? And here's a sad note. Here's Ann's property. We're doing all this work, right, to chip up these unwanted trees to make the forest healthier. And a biologist would come out there and say, this is a better end product for the long-term wildlife profile of this property. Okay? So we're doing those things. Right across the property line, right across her fence line, is a tract that Georgia Power is getting ready to bid off, sell the timber, and there's no provision in that bid for salvaging the unwanted biomass, limbs, tops, and that type of thing, to take it to the very plant where they're buying the power and putting it in their grid. Now, I'm not here to pick on Georgia Power. What I am trying to say is, if you take all the possibilities in our state and you look at the barriers to getting one of these plants going, and again, there's a site in LaGrange owned by Callaway Foundation. They've already got the gray water from the water treatment plant to make the steam. There's no environmental impact in that regard of taking water out of the Chattahoochee or anything like that. They're just using gray water, making steam, cooling it down, and treating it and letting it go. Then, you know, that barrier was there, and that's the reason it didn't get the funding it needed, the investors it needed. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm hogging the table.
Oh, please.
And
And we had to convince Ann to come. We've got about 3 or 4 more minutes of this,
Wow.
and then time for questions.
I had time so well.
And then what we'll do, we'll just get to our committee, your PowerPoint slides. We can get it copied and get it to them. So things don't always go the way they're planned. We've learned that up here very well. But this is what we need to know, is how can we as a committee look at our issues and see how individual landowners and property owners can get involved in this process, because we know we're moving down to that level now as opposed to our very large producers. And we passed legislation just this year that is encouraging the workings for all things for electricity. So Ms. Beagle, Ann, would you like to say how you found him and why you decided to do this?
It's interesting. I didn't want to find Jonathan, but my husband did want to find Jonathan, because I, being uneducated about it, would have left our land exactly the way it is. But 2 things happened. He cleared one area for us, about 40 acres, that just needed clearing because the pines were not growing very healthy and they didn't look very good, and they were on a street. We weren't using this land for anything except it was there. And Jonathan came in and cleared it in a way that amazed me. And I mean, everything around us that we see, we own about 1,600 acres. And we're on the Chattahoochee River, and Cedar Creek intersects and runs into the river on our property. So we have a huge, I think, opportunity and an obligation to take care of our land. What he did was show me that it could be cleared in a way that's attractive, that is, and the thing about the chipping, I have 2 electric cars. I bought a hybrid in 2007. I bought an electric car last year, and we just bought another one last week. And I'm very interested in renewable energy. And by the way, what our land, what it produced hasn't made its way to me in my car. For one thing, Georgia Power does give a break to people to power their car at night when they're charging it. They get a break in the power bill. I have EMC, and they have not chosen to go there yet, which would be nice if they did, because we now have 2 to charge. But I learned so much from Jonathan about taking care of my property. We have an enormous amount of wildlife. We were the stopover for 5 years for the whooping cranes. When they changed their migration pattern, when they only went to Texas, they reinitiated a migration route to Florida. And we were the stopping over place for these whooping cranes, that are hugely endangered. And if they had some algae growing on some of those roads,
I think there's been a connection made here today, I believe.
They don't want to cross busy highways, for one thing. It doesn't work real well. But all of this to me is tied in together. I have a huge passion for renewable energy. I have a huge passion for my land. We have so much wildlife. We also are recreation, and we've had 10 years of fundraisers on our farm to give to for one charity actually. But I'm very into this, and I'm so excited what I've learned from this man. I didn't have any idea. All around me, right next to Corral, most people don't know what that is, but it's a therapeutic riding school for disabled children. And a bank that was managing some property for a private landowner cleared acres right next to them, clear cut. It's the ugliest. Even 2 years later, it's a wasteland. It's horrible to look at, and no good came from it except somebody made some money for some timbering. But what Jonathan is suggesting is amazing to me. We live in view of the towers from Georgia Power, from Plant Yates. And I'm going to get some algae, by the way. But anyway, I'm so excited about what I've learned from him, and I really support what he says, the idea that we could do something effectively. Everybody, gets a glazed over look when we talk about renewable energy and
well, we're the geeky committee, so we really like this kind of talk.
I'm so glad to hear that, because I am so excited. When Jonathan first said, let's do an article, I thought, well, I have nothing to offer. He said, well, you don't just talk about your electric car and your love of your land, and that's all I know how to do. So I am 100% behind what he has taught me. It's just been amazing. If there's anything I can do to promote that, I'm all for that, and I would love to be included in when you go. And
that's what happens here, just all the different connections we're able to make. In just a couple of minutes, we're going to have a subcommittee meeting, so I'll adjourn our full committee. But are there any questions right now for our presenters? Will you lead, first of all, give us your slide presentation. I'll get it to the committee, and then your contact information to the newer members to the committee. At one point in time, we were really moving right along with the woody biomass and the plants, and some of our industries have it tied in, like especially in South Georgia, but the market isn't there yet. The cost, that break right in the middle where it's cost effective to switch and use that, but it's coming, and it's something that we need to be aware of as a committee, and water is such an important part of this process, and I think that more and more we're finding how to use not necessarily potable water, but gray water and such as that to make this happen. So you have both, to y'all today and to y'all, you have really given us a very concrete example of the good stewardship that exists in our states by private individuals and foundations, and I think that's very encouraging. Those of us here will be talking to people in our neighborhoods and in our communities and passing this along. And we have the house photographer here, so the photos are available for y'all to use in your promos, and our committee members also can have that available to them today. But do you have any closing remarks? So you get a couple minutes for closing remarks here.
I don't have much to say. Yeah. I just think it's critically important that the state is going to be involved in renewables, that they look at this more closely and see how they can facilitate industry coming and implementing some of these plants and facilities. It has too much to do with economic development. We didn't talk about the local jobs affiliated with this plant that are excluded from bringing energy from out of state. So just from a lot of perspectives, it's a very positive thing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And then we'll do a switch. So the Environmental Quality Subcommittee will be meeting on the Senator's bill. And Senator, you're here already, so I will move and switch over to Representative Hardin, who's going to be chairing that committee.